Trish Crain.
That'll be the first and last time I ever hear James say something nice about me, won't it? No, I'm just kidding. I don't do well behind this podium. Is that okay if I move around?
No.
I have to stay still? Yes. Oh, God, okay. Well, you'll see me fidget a lot. I have a secret up here, and that is that I herniated a disc a week ago, and it's been really an interesting journey into chronic pain. So, but I'm good. I'm here. I'm happy to be here. That was what I didn't want to tell you earlier. I had to wait until my pain medication wore off before I stood here, though, so you'll see me fidget just a little bit. I did at least want to remember what I said, James. So I appreciate you having me here today. I get really excited when I see groups of people come together. I'm like the kid in the candy store. I see groups of people and I go, yay, opportunity, opportunity. You know, we can share information, we can talk, we can just basically share information, we can communicate. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is information and communication. And I am technically a reporter these days, okay? So I don't advocate for any positions on issues, but what I do advocate for is good information and good communication. Because I too, like James said, I see things go terribly wrong when it's just a simple matter of I said it the wrong way and somebody's feelings get hurt. And then the relationship sort of falls apart from there. But before I start, I do have to say, I have one of my board members here, and it's Gwen Brown. So I was thrilled you won the iPad. I didn't do anything to make that happen. But Gwen, I really, really appreciate Gwen. I have 3 wonderful board members who have been with me from the beginning when we weren't sure this thing was going to work out. And we're still teetering on the edge. You know, I don't know if this thing can work. Nonprofit news is kind of a weird little animal. You rely on donations, but you're producing news, and so your donors can't control your content. It's weird. So I'm learning new things about information and communication all the time, too. Gosh, microphones. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know. Everybody in here communicates every day, right? Every day you get up in the morning, it's a hello, it's a phone call, you're taking in information off the television or your phone or wherever, and you're putting it back out there. But what I want to ask you today while I'm talking, I want you to think about information and communication as separate beasts, okay? So you have information over here. That's all the stuff that's written down on your cards or what's in front of you or what's up here. All of that is information, okay? Communicating it, and this is really interesting, the speech-language pathology sort of slant to it. I have 0 medical experience, so I'm always fascinated by the service provider aspect of it. But taking all this information and assimilating it and putting it back out there, whether it's written or spoken or visual or however you want to do it, that is communication. That's the way I look at it. And so there are 2 pieces. Every time I go to write an article or try to convey something, even when I make a phone call to James, I think about I've got information and I've got to communicate it, right? So you've got all your information over here and your communication over here. And it's very important that your information, that you're able to communicate your information, as I sit here and struggle to do the same, right? So, you know, the information, you've got to know what you're going to say before you say it. And that preparation time, that gathering the information, that deciphering the information. I know there's probably like a medical term for it, but I don't know what that is. I take things very simply. So it's kind of like when you're getting ready to communicate with someone, because this is what we do, right? I know that there are educators and parents in the room, and I missed the show of hands, so I'm going to take a guess that it's about evenly split. But whenever you're getting ready to get together, educators and parents, or maybe just educators, maybe the special education teachers with the general education teachers, right? You've got to communicate something to each other. So you've got to prepare. You've got to think, okay, who am I talking with today? Why are we talking? What is the goal of our discussion? And I know this sounds really simple, and y'all are thinking, why is she, I'm ready to take a nap. But, you know, this is at the heart of making sure that the goals for children are met, right? Because at the center of all this, the reason we're here, and looking at solutions for children, right? To make everybody grows up and everything works out better than it did when we were growing up, right? So you got to think about who you're talking with, what are you trying to communicate with them, right? When I call my board member, I call Gwen my friend and we have one set of conversations, but when I call my board member, I'm conveying something very different. I need to have a different set of information that she can act as a board member. So I know in schools sometimes things get confusing, right? You've got friendships with people, and then you've also got these provider relationships with people. And I see that because I have friendships with teachers. I have friendships with school officials who I then have to call back and ask some really tough questions. And they don't like that very much, do they, James? When I ask them those hard questions, they kind of want to go, God, I thought you were my friend. And it's like, well, I am, but I'm also a reporter, and I need a different set of information for that. So I think the biggest tip when you're thinking about, when you're getting ready to go into a meeting with someone, you're preparing for an IEP meeting, you're calling your attorney, whoever it is that you're communicating with, you think, what is this goal, right? What is the goal of our time together? People's time is very precious. Don't waste people's time. That's what I've learned. My father had a saying. He would say, use as few words as possible. And of course, he was married to my mother, right? And my mother used as many words as possible. She likes words, which is where I get it from. But I can hear my father say, use as few words as possible. The fewer words you use, the less you give people to argue with you about, right? I liked that. That all of a sudden felt powerful because I thought, okay, if I'm not using words, how am I expressing my power? But if I don't give you anything to argue with me about, then I'm taking back my power, right? It's always a power struggle with me. Ask my sister. So information and communication are different, right? Information is the data, the words, the pictures. There's everything, that little scrolly bar across there. That was tough to get, y'all, and I don't even look at it. But so when you're looking at information, you pull up a website, and you're thinking you've got to research something. You're on your way to a meeting, and you've got to gather some information. Or say somebody sends you a link and says, look at this. And so you look at it and you think, well, why should I believe what this woman or this person from the Alabama School Connection has to say? I hear this all the time from people. How do I know what's credible, right? How do I know that this is a good piece of information? Academics, y'all know you go to the academic journals, right? You just, as long as it says the journal of something, you're in good shape most of the time. But when you get as much information as is out there now, parents are often misled. And it's not through any fault of our own. It's that we're believing it because it really looks good on a page. I learned a long time ago, I've been doing this for about 10 years, but I learned that if you make it look good, people believe it more, right? I mean, it looks like it's been typeset or a graphic designer has touched it. It's got some good colors. The balance is good. People believe it more. I don't know why that is, but it is the truth. So we can get fooled very easily. And forgive me, my pain medication makes me thirsty. Okay, so I have my first rule. I'm going to give you 3 rules today. The first rule is don't ever repeat anything you just heard the first time, okay? We do this. So these terrible breaking news stories that we get. The phone rings and it's my mother and I've just seen something on television. Did you see? And you repeat it. Well, parents and educators might do that too sometimes, right? That parent, did you hear her? She was yelling in the front office. These sort of things, right? Now we're getting into relationships and how information affects relationships, okay? Information, we haven't gotten to communication yet, but information that is passed on, the way it's passed on, the way it's taken in, is it credible? Oh, it's so hard to stand still. Is it credible? Is it, does it look like they're telling the truth? Because, you read this, what Alabama's House delegation said about the Every Student Succeeds Act. By the way, that's the replacement for No Child Left Behind. I was so excited when I remembered that was called a House delegation. I struggled with that for about 10 minutes thinking, all these House members, I know they're called something. And then I almost laughed at myself. I thought, I'm an idiot. But somehow I'm able to put that up there and it makes sense. And people go, okay, now we know what those 7 folks that we elected there in Congress in the House, what they said about the replacement for No Child Left Behind. So when you think about the information that you're gathering in and the way I'm really into information and communication, as you can tell. So I get a real big kick out of the kind of quagmires I find myself in sometimes. The words that I use I get a kick out of them. Let's just put it that way. I'm in this huge war right now with the special education department at the State Department, which also kind of is interesting. But, okay, so you've got your source that's credible. You're not going to repeat anything that you just heard. I mean, nobody's ever done that, right? My sister is the most guilty of that, Gwen. You know that, right? She'll repeat something that she's just heard, and then it might be bad information. It's hard to pull that stuff back. Once you've said it, it's out there, and you can't pull it back. So opinions are fine, right? But you got to make sure you don't mask something that is opinion as a fact, okay? And this is all going to come together here in just a minute. When you get your information and you pass on information, you're talking credibility here, right? And when you think about a parent and an educator, because this is the perspective that I always come from when I think about information and communication in a conference like this, it's a relationship. And if one missteps, if one passes along bad information to the other, there's a trust issue there. All of a sudden, oh, wait a minute, you didn't tell me the truth. You said that, and I'm the parent now, you said that my child didn't qualify for speech language services. But I was at a conference, and this woman told me that my child did. So that's why you have to be really careful about the way you communicate the information that you just learned. For instance, if you ran into that, you wouldn't go back and say, you lied to me. I mean, that isn't the way you start, right? I mean, that might be what you think. You lied to me. You told me that my child didn't qualify, but my child does qualify. Instead, you might say, the way that I think about being nice to people now, I was at a conference, and I want to share this PowerPoint with you that was shared by a speech language pathologist who said that it may be that my child qualifies. Can we look at that again? I mean, there's a difference there, right? I mean, which one would you respond to better? Also, let's say an educator gets some information. Maybe the child tells the teacher that the child is acting up. The teacher says, well, why are you acting that way? Well, I haven't eaten in 3 days. I mean, that's highly unlikely, right? But I can think of some crazy stuff my kids told their teachers about me, and luckily they would come back and say, really? No, that wasn't quite right. It was close, but it wasn't quite right. It's only been 2 days now. But, because I don't like to cook. But so you have to be really careful in that credibility moment. That credibility moment comes not with just information that you've gathered, but also the way you communicate it. So we're going to talk about communication for a few minutes. Before I get to that, does anybody am I making myself clear about what information is and what information isn't? And that there's a difference between information and communication? That's kind of a basic thing, right? And when you start to really separate those out in your daily interactions with people, because like I say, I get a kick out of this stuff. I think about when I'm on the phone with my mother and it's been 20 minutes since I've said a word, right? And she's been talking, and I'm happy to do that. My mother needs somebody to listen to her, right? If she hadn't talked to anybody all day. So I'm thinking, what am I contributing to the conversation? And I'm just contributing that I'm listening, right? But at some point, it's important for me to jump in there and actually act like I've been paying attention. I've been paying attention. But, to be able to reflect back something. But we do both have a role in that. And so I know sometimes I've been in IEP meetings where a teacher will sit very quietly and absolutely say nothing. There may be 3 or 4 teachers in there, and the parent and maybe the special education director are doing most of the talking. Maybe there's a lot of back and forth. Maybe there's an attorney in the room, and they're doing a lot of talking. And I'm sure the special education, the teacher that's sitting there saying nothing is thinking, what am I contributing to this, right? This is not an efficient use of my time. Remember I said use few words and don't waste time? But being there and listening and taking notes, or just simply being in that room with that parent, is an affirmation that issue, that focus that you're there for that day is important, right? So no pulling out your phones. I know you don't do that. But it's very important to be present during those times of information sharing through communication. Okay, so communicating. is I look at communication as the way we persuade someone, okay? Either we're persuading them that we're smart, that we're saying something smart and they're affirming, or they're disagreeing with us. But we're persuading them. Every time we communicate with someone, we're persuading them that we know what we're talking about. If I'm trying to persuade you that I know what I'm talking about up here right now, right? And it's simply experience. It isn't a degree or anything in communication. It's more of an experience of communication from a different perspective of, I want to tell Benji thinks that I know stuff, right? Sometimes. And I'm going to share something with him on Facebook. I'm going to communicate this to him, and I want him to think that I know what I'm talking about. So that's my communication. That's what I mean by persuading. Persuading is not a bad thing, all right? Everything I do at Alabama School Connection is to persuade folks that they need to care about this stuff. That whole propelling K-12 education into Alabama's everyday conversations is my catchphrase, but I want you to care about this really dry and uninteresting stuff. It's, you might think to yourself, why should I care about this stuff? Well, take that question into your everyday conversations, right? I mean, we are surrounded by information here. I've got to pick through what of this information I want to share and communicate with the rest of the world when I leave here. What did I learn here? How am I going to communicate this back? So are y'all's heads spinning at this point? So when you're communicating, and this is what I would say, particularly in the setting of the IEP meetings or in the special education world and the time when parents and educators come together to talk about the child. I think the hardest, what my role is when I attend an IEP meeting with someone as an advocate, I try to keep the focus on the child. We've all been, maybe not all of us, but we've all been in those meetings where all of a sudden different issues start being a part of the conversation. Well, you didn't call me back for 3 days. My mother was sick and I wasn't at school for 4 days, so how did I know? And all this extraneous stuff starts getting into those communications. You're pulling all this information that has nothing to do with why you're there at the meeting. I think one of the hardest things in the world to do in the middle of an IEP meeting is to stay focused on, when things get a little rough. Now, a lot of times it's really dry. James, I've never been in a meeting with you or Gina, and I really want to be, because I can imagine that y'all are, really staying focused and really on task and not getting off into extraneous things about no phone calls and, not talking about emails, not being returned. But this is where I see a lot of the conversation, a lot of the time gets spent, and I would say even wasted. Because, and this is your second rule, don't use I statements. Right? We hear that a lot. In writing, you're not supposed to use I statements. You don't start with I. But in IEP meetings, which starts with I just realized, the idea is to keep the focus on the child, right? So you don't say, and teachers and parents can be guilty of this. I'm trying to keep your child focused in my classroom. It's not about what you're trying to do. It's about whether or not the child is focused, okay? I tried to do the homework with my child last night that you sent home. I couldn't do the exercises. It's not about whether you could do the exercises or not. It's about whether your child could. So this is, and I say this because I'm guilty of it, right? I think we all are. I've heard lots of people, the focus somehow shifts off of the child and onto the adults in the room. So to me, this is the most important rule, is to stay away from I statements when you're in those, when you're talking, I don't want to say on opposite sides of the table, but when you're, even gen ed and special ed teachers, I think about this a lot. I hear that there's some breakdown sometimes there in communication. And so you've got to stay focused on the child. It isn't, I've got 7 other children on my caseload today. It's when I'm meeting with that gen ed teacher about this particular child, let's talk about the child and get out of there. as few words as possible and move on to the next thing. And then talk in the, on the playground or in the teacher's lounge or after school or whatever about the other stuff that you have to do. Make it efficient. Make that communication, that if you stay on task, and y'all mark my words here, if you stay on task and you keep focused on what your goal is for that meeting, you're going to get it done, right? You're actually going to walk out of there and think, okay, I accomplished what I meant. But if you get off on it's raining outside, and you'll find yourself, no, it's not, by the way. I saw a bunch of people look outside. If you get off on something like that, then you're going to take away from the communication time that you have. Am I right, Gwen? I mean, Gwen and I have been through this. Gwen is an excellent communicator. But there are times, and I'm sure this is something that you talk about as an advocate with your parents, right? Parents have a tendency to stray off topic. Teachers and providers do too. So keep yourself out of the communication. That's what that means when I say no I statements. Keep yourself out of it. It doesn't have anything to do. You can let that go blank. That's fine, James. Really doesn't have anything to do with you, unless it has something to do with your skill level, okay? There are times when, I simply can't, I don't have the skill level or the training to make that happen. Then it's okay to talk about yourself. But otherwise, keep the focus on the child. The last thing I want to talk about, I'm out of time, I've got 2 minutes, so I'm going to talk about emotion. And emotion is the toughest thing that parents deal with. And I'm here to tell you that every time I get together with parents, somebody ends up in tears when it's a group of parents. And I think, and this is where even these meetings that we had, the special education regulation changes a few weeks ago, there were parents in tears standing at the front of the room in these big auditoriums, and the educators in the room were sitting very stone-faced. They were sitting because this was the role that everybody had to play, or so they thought. I think these were the instructions that were given. Nobody acknowledged each other, because that would be terrible, if we all looked at each other and actually had feelings, right? So the parents were pouring their hearts out, and their tears coming down, men and women, not just a constant cry fest, okay? I'm just saying that there were people that were very emotional there. And then there were educators and officials from the State Department who just did that. And it felt, and the feelings, what was so frustrating as I sat there and watched that, I thought, oh my gosh, we're missing such awesome opportunities to create some relationships, We're missing this opportunity where these parents can feel like they're heard. Whose job was it to make them feel heard? I don't know. Maybe it was the people who held the meeting. But we missed some really good opportunities there to go back and forth to say, I empathize with you. Isn't that what communication's about? I mean, isn't that what you're ultimately trying to do when your parents and educators are at the table together? I see where you're coming from. I want to help you. And I want you to help me too, because, right, it's a two-way street, right? Educators aren't the supermen of the world. They have feelings, they have things going on in their world too. But when it's about school and when it's about special education and when you're at an IEP meeting, it's about the child that you're talking about. And that's what I hope, just trying to keep that at the forefront of your mind when all this extraneous stuff can come in. When you're talking with parents, you think, oh, I mean, I love Gina's jacket today. I was so distracted by it. Stand up, Gina, and let everybody see your jacket. It's a great jacket, but it's just, and so if I was sitting in a meeting and I was kind of bored, my mind would probably be going, God, that is so cool. It looks like this and it looks like that. So you got to stay in the moment. You got to stay focused, and you got to stay focused on the child. I really applaud all that educators do, all that parents do. I say I don't have any children with, if I can speak it, a disability that's been identified, that was identified in K-12. That doesn't mean they don't have one. It means it was never identified. And in fact, one of my children does. It's turned out as they've gotten into college, which went unnoticed and unidentified. But when you can get this information thing, gathering in, picking up points, taking, pieces of information, putting them together in a meaningful way, communicating them back to the people that you're talking with, then that is like 95% of the battle, right? I mean, if you can just make sure that the words that you assimilate. I keep thinking about the presentation you just did. I meant to write down some words because I thought those were smart words. Take the information that you've gotten and then communicate it back. And it sounds really simple, but I tell you, it's one of the hardest things in the world to do. So I hope that I've given you something to think about the next time you go into either write an email, make a phone call, sit down in a meeting with somebody. Prepare your mind, prepare the words that are coming in, know what you've taken in to get ready for the meeting, know how to put it back out there in a way that is going to move you towards your goal and stay focused on the child. That's all I got. Does anybody have any questions? That's okay. No questions? It's kind of a common sense thing. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, James.